I'm Thordis Thorsteins and I'm a senior AI data scientist at Panaseer. Now, the scenario that I want you to keep in mind throughout today's webinar is the last time that your CISO or the board asked you to explain why an important security metric had changed. And I want you to think about the process that you went through to answer that question and just how time-consuming that was as well. Because if we're being realistic, no one wants to show up to the board and report on an important security metric that's gotten worse and not have a solid narrative around why it's changed, what steps are being taken to improve it again, or what steps have already been taken to improve it. So we know it's critical for teams to understand why these metrics have changed, but we also know that that can be a really labor-intensive thing to do. So both from speaking to a variety of customers and also just from personal experience from working with data for a number of years, we know that understanding or spotting that a metric has changed, that's the easy part. But understanding why it's changed, that's a whole other beast. And that tends to be quite a manual process. It can be error prone, and it often takes hours or in some cases even days. And it's one thing if security teams want to use their time like that, but we strongly believe that the team should have the choice to not spend their time on that analysis if they don't want to. And that's why we think this is quite an important area to look at opportunities to automate so that security teams can spend their time on areas that truly require security expertise, such as interpreting results and deciding what to do next. So this is a type of AI functionality that works in real time and works on any security metric. And it takes the security metrics data and it will explain why a change has happened between two different points. And this can either be change that's happened suddenly, or it can be more of a gradual change that's happened over time. Either one, any change that's happened, the solution will explain what the key drivers for that change were. And it will provide a prioritized list. So the top segment is the segment that contributed most, second one, the second biggest contributor, and so forth. And to do this, we use a type of predictive AI algorithm. And what this type of algorithm does is it essentially optimizes the analysis that a human would have to do beyond what would be feasible or realistic for any person. And the reason why this becomes quite challenging to do if a person was to do this is that most businesses they'll have so many segments and so many dimensions that matter when it comes to explaining a change. So if a metric has changed, what the sort of things you may want to consider are, for example, different business dimensions, such as business units, divisions, departments, teams, so forth. You may also want to consider technical dimensions. So if the metric has to do with devices, for example, you may care about the type of device, you may care about the operating system, you may even care about who the owner of the device is. And as you increase this list of dimensions that you care about, identifying drivers across the different permutations of segments that the dimensions make up simply becomes unscalable. And that's why this is a great use of predictive AI algorithms that can optimize that analysis and highlight what the most important drivers were. And what we really hope for is that companies will be able to make more confident decisions because they've got reliable data and they've got more time to make those decisions because they're not having to spend as much time on the analysis itself. And ultimately, we want them to move from a place where they're acting in a reactive way, and it may feel like they're kind of constantly firefighting, and instead move to working more proactively, where as soon as a change has happened, they have the answers to what drove that change, which better sets them up for deciding what to do about it. So what does key drivers look like in practice? Well, here we've got an example metric, AV update out of SLA. So this metric counts the number of devices whose AV version is behind where it should be. And we can see that at the moment, the number of such devices is 561. And we can also see that this metric has the red threshold status at the moment, which means that it's outside of the company risk appetite for this metric, which is defined through the thresholds here. And furthermore, we can see that while the metric has for a while been within this green range here, it's just recently breached the threshold and tipped into the red territory. So this is a classic example of where key drivers can be quite useful because it really allows you to understand what drove that change and what drove the metric to breach the threshold. So we can click a single button here, show key drivers. And when we do that, we get the summary of the key drivers through a prioritized list. So the first line will tell us what the biggest contributor to this change is. And in this particular example, it's user devices. And this group has changed by 130. So there's 130 devices not on the latest AV version now compared to what they were 7 days ago. And that explains 68 or just over 68% of the change. Then the second biggest contributor, that allows us to dive down deeper and see that it's specifically user devices within the bonds business unit, and they explain just over 37% of the change. So using this information, we can decide what we want to do. So we may, for example, review whether there's any process changes that are required that specifically impact user devices. And if we want an even more targeted approach to understand this issue, we could speak to people managing user devices within the bonds business unit. By default, there's a number of dimensions that are included in the analysis and that can be used to make up these segments that explain the change. But this list is configurable, so you can include as many of the available dimensions as you'd like, and key drivers will automatically analyze the results across all the different dimensions and identify the biggest contributors in terms of the change. So this example looked at a single metric, AV update out of SLA, but as mentioned before, key drivers works across all the different security metrics within the Panaseer platform. So what might you use key drivers for? I'm going to use 3 examples to illustrate some of the common use cases that key drivers are used for. So the first one is perhaps not the most exciting, or some people might not find it exciting, but it's actually my personal favorite because I feel like it really highlights how key drivers shines when it comes to everyday operations. So this first use case is making sure that you're ready for board reporting. So most companies will have to do some sort of reporting to their boards on a regular basis, and they might report on a standard set of metrics. And for those metrics, you need to provide an accompanying narrative. So you need to comment on what the current statuses are, but also if there's any noteworthy changes that have happened, you have to be able to explain why those changes happened. And this is where key drivers can really help understand why that change has happened and save time so you can focus more on preparing the narrative and getting ready for the board meeting. But there are other cases that you may use key drivers for. So one is, for example, if you notice that your endpoint patch compliance has dropped by 7% in a week. So let's assume this is a metric that you're monitoring kind of on a weekly basis, and you check in on it after a while, or well, hopefully not after too long a while, but after a few days, and you notice this drop has happened. By clicking on the key drivers button, you'll be presented with the drivers for that change, and you might see that there's 2 business units that are responsible for that change, that are driving that change predominantly. And this helps you uncover that a recent OS upgrade in those two business units impacted the update frequency. The third example is understanding why an unexpected and kind of out of the ordinary change has happened. So let's say, for example, that you are monitoring, let's say, MFA adoption, and you notice that after being relatively stable for a long time, the rate unexpectedly falls. Now, key drivers, again, by pressing that key drivers button, you'll automatically see that it's actually primarily remote workers that are driving that. And this could highlight, for example, a policy misconfiguration that's affecting that part of the workforce. So in all three cases, by just clicking one button for the metric that you're interested in, you will be able to automatically see what the drivers of the change were, helping you understand whether there's policy updates that are required, whether there's any further actions or remediation steps required, and what communication you need to share with your board, your stakeholders, whoever else is a relevant stakeholder. If you're planning to use key driver analysis to help with your own investigations, there's a number of best practices that we recommend you follow. So first of all, we recommend that you integrate a broad set of relevant data sources, because the richer and the more relevant the data that the AI solution is exposed to, the better equipped it is to identify relevant insights. The second thing we recommend is that you investigate any key drivers that are identified as quickly as you can. And the reason for that is that the solution will help identify the drivers, but it's ultimately up to you to take action based on that. And to avoid any unnecessarily long dwell times, for example, it's important to take actions on the drivers when you see them. This relates to the third point, which is that we recommend that you validate output with human context, because the AI will give you the drivers, but an analyst or security expert can confirm and recommend actions based on the identified drivers. Then it's quite important to make the insights accessible to relevant parties. So that can be stakeholders, it can be the teams who are responsible for taking actions or recommending which action should be taken. To facilitate collaboration between these different parties, it's really important to have a common view that everyone can work off. So make sure that your insights are accessible to all relevant parties. And then lastly, we really recommend that you track trends over time. And this is to help you spot the need for any changes based on systematic causes. So if you find, for example, that the same metric keeps getting worse, you keep fixing it, it gets worse again, and you kind of go around circle after circle, at that point it's quite important to first of all have something in place to spot that pattern among all the noise, but also something that helps you take that step back and decide what to do based on the recurring issue that you're seeing. This is the first of many steps we've got planned on our AI journey. And we are really excited about what's to come. And in particular, we're excited about the AI functionalities that we're planning to add to the Panaseer platform in Q4. And if you want to be among the first to try those new AI functionalities out, you can sign up to our waitlist. So the link to that should be available in the attachment section of this webinar, I believe. So please go ahead and sign up there. Alternatively, my inbox is always open, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to discuss any of the content of the webinar in more detail there. I hope that you found this webinar useful, and I look forward to sharing more with you soon in the coming weeks or months. Thank you very much.